When we say slaves, have you ever imagined why only Africans were chosen as slaves over others? Let's explore this. Throughout history, the grim institution of slavery has left its indelible mark on humanity, transcending geographical boundaries and affecting diverse populations. One misconception that needs to be dispelled is the notion that African people were the exclusive targets of enslavement. This is far from the truth, as slavery was an unfortunate reality experienced by many different ethnic and racial groups across the globe. Slavery in various forms existed in nearly every corner of the world. From ancient civilizations in Asia, the Americas, and Europe to the empires of the Middle East and Africa, countless societies practiced some form of forced labor and bondage. The reasons for enslavement were multifaceted and often related to economic, social, and political factors. In fact, Africans were not the initial or sole targets of enslavement. Slavery was often a result of proximity. Those in close geographical proximity to powerful empires or nations were more vulnerable to enslavement. The enslavement of Africans was part of this broader pattern, shaped by the expansion of Arab empires, European colonization, and economic interests. Recognizing that slavery was a global phenomenon that transcended race is crucial for understanding the complexity of this dark chapter in human history. It underscores the importance of acknowledging the suffering and resilience of all enslaved populations, and serves as a reminder that the legacy of slavery continues to impact societies worldwide. The historical narrative reveals a troubling progression in the specific targeting of Africans for enslavement, prompting a critical question. Why did this shift occur over time? While the origins of African enslavement were multifaceted, understanding this evolving dynamic is essential for a comprehensive grasp of the historical context. In the complex tapestry of history, why did the enslavement of Africans transition from a geographically driven practice to a racially targeted one? What role did religious justifications and economic interests play in this transformation? Explore the evolution of slavery and its connection to proximity, power, and ideology. Initially, in the annals of human history, enslavement was not racially selective. Proximity, societal shifts, and power dynamics played predominant roles in determining who would become enslaved. Africans, much like individuals from other regions, were subjected to this practice based on these factors. The demand for enslaved labor was contingent on geographical proximity to regions where slavery was prevalent and economically advantageous. However, the escalation of African enslavement can be attributed to a series of interconnected historical events. The expansion of Arab empires in North Africa and the Middle East led to an increase in enslaved Africans from Western Africa, driven largely by proximity. As European powers entered the global stage during the Age of Exploration, they also began participating in the transatlantic slave trade. The vastness and diversity of the African continent made it easier to access and capture enslaved populations. Furthermore, religious and pseudo-scientific justifications, such as the Curse of Ham, started to underpin the perception of Africans as inferior, providing an ideological basis for their enslavement. These factors, combined with the economic interests of European colonizers, led to the specific targeting of Africans for enslavement, ultimately raising the question of why this shift in focus occurred. In the early annals of human history, the practice of enslavement was fundamentally characterized by its non-discriminatory nature. Virtually all humans, regardless of their racial or ethnic background, were susceptible to enslavement, and this vulnerability was primarily determined by geographical proximity. Africans, like individuals from other parts of the world, were encompassed within the scope of this tradition. The criteria for enslavement often hinged on factors such as proximity to regions where enslavement was prevalent, the emergence of powerful empires or conquerors, and the economic incentives for acquiring enslaved labor. Communities, irrespective of their origins, could find themselves subjected to the institution of slavery if they happened to reside near or came into contact with enslaving societies or forces. This practice of proximity-based enslavement underscores the universality of slavery as a historical phenomenon, transcending racial distinctions. It is essential to recognize that the early stages of enslavement were not driven by racial prejudice or discrimination, but rather by the pragmatism of those in power seeking to exploit available labor resources. How did the early practice of enslavement, driven by proximity and economic considerations, evolve into the racially motivated enslavement of Africans? What role did Arab empires play in this transformation, and why did the demand for African slaves eventually surpass that of other groups? Explore the complex factors behind the history of African enslavement and its lasting impact. as history unfolded. However, various factors, including the expansion of empires and the emergence of racial ideologies, would significantly shape the evolution of slavery, leading to the more targeted and racially motivated enslavement of African populations. Understanding this early phase of non-discriminatory enslavement is crucial in comprehending the subsequent historical shifts and injustices that followed. The historical record reveals that Arabs played a significant role in the early enslavement of Africans, particularly in regions bordering the Arabian Peninsula and the African continent. However, it is essential to recognize that this enslavement was primarily a consequence of proximity and socioeconomic factors, rather than a deliberate or conscious choice to target Africans specifically based on race. Before the rise of Islam, there existed a negative perception of skin color among some Arabs, but this prejudice alone cannot explain the early enslavement of Africans. Instead, it was geographical proximity that made Africans more accessible for enslavement. As Arab empires expanded and established dominance in regions like North Africa, they naturally encountered African populations, including Ethiopians, and began to enslave them. It's important to note that this early Arab enslavement of Africans was not unique. It paralleled the enslavement of various other groups based on proximity and power dynamics. Arabs, like many other societies throughout history, resorted to enslavement as a means of acquiring labor and exerting control over neighboring populations. In essence, while Arabs were among the first to engage in the enslavement of Africans, consequently, the enslavement of Africans became more widespread and persistent, shaping the course of history and contributing to the complex legacy of African enslavement. The arrival of European colonizers in the Americas marked a significant turning point in the history of slavery. Africans were specifically chosen as a labor force for the New World due to a combination of factors that reflected the prevailing attitudes and needs of the time. Firstly, Africans were believed to possess a unique ability to withstand the grueling tropical climates of the Americas. Many European settlers, particularly in regions like the Caribbean and the American South, found the local climates harsh and debilitating. Africans, with their experience in similar climates, were considered better suited to endure the physical rigors of working in these harsh conditions. Secondly, Africans had a reputation as formidable warriors. This reputation stemmed from various historical contexts, including their roles in African conflicts and their service as soldiers in Arab and European armies. European colonizers perceived Africans as physically strong and capable, making them valuable for labor-intensive tasks and as a potential workforce for defending their newfound territories. Lastly, the Curse of Ham myth played a significant role in justifying the enslavement of Africans. This pseudo-religious concept suggested that Africans were descendants of Ham who had been cursed by God. European colonizers used this myth to legitimize their exploitation of Africans, painting them as inferior and divinely ordained to servitude. Collectively, these factors led to the conscious choice of Africans as the primary source of enslaved labor in the Americas. It was a disturbing convergence of environmental factors, perceived strengths, and deeply ingrained racist ideologies that shaped the course of African enslavement in the New World and left an enduring legacy of racial injustice. And that's all for this video. Subscribe for more.